Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
With one speech, President Donald Trump set out to unify a divided nation, inspire the future, and assure Americans he intends to keep his promises. What we're witnessing today, he says, is a renewal of the American spirit.
Our allies will find that America is once again ready to lead.
He set the tone with a public commemoration of Black History Month while reflecting on the work that remains.
Recent threats targeting Jewish community centers and vandalism of Jewish cemeteries, as well as last week's shooting in Kansas City, remind us that while we may be a nation divided on policies, we are a country that stands united in condemning hate and evil in all of its very ugly forms.
He calls education the civil rights issue of our day and suggests allowing school choice will help revitalize urban regions failing minority youths. Despite court delays of his so-called travel ban order, the president doubled down on his promise to get tough on illegal immigration.
We are removing gang members, drug dealers, and criminals that threaten our communities and prey on our very innocent citizens. Bad ones are going out as I speak.
House Speaker Paul Ryan says the president hit a home run. He succeeded in offering details for some of his plans congressional Republicans can rally behind as he works to gain some badly needed legislative victories.
We should ensure that Americans with pre-existing conditions have access to coverage and that we have a stable transition for Americans currently enrolled in the health care exchanges.
In one of the night's most moving moments, the president recognized Corinne Owens, widow of Senior Chief Ryan Owens, who was killed in a covert raid against al-Qaeda in Yemen, the first service member to die under Trump's watch. Tears streamed down her cheeks as members of Congress stood and clapped for several minutes.
For as the Bible teaches us, there is no greater act of love than to lay down one's life for one's friends. Ryan laid down his life for his friends, for his country, and for our freedom.
In an effort to appeal to evangelicals and Rust Belt voters who put Trump in the White House, Democrats chose a folksy response. Former Kentucky Governor Steve Beshear recounted his Baptist heritage, patriotism, and family values from a diner in Lexington as he criticized the president for rolling back regulations, waging war on immigrants, and calling to repeal Obamacare.
You know, in 2010, this country made a commitment that every American deserved health care they could afford and rely on. And we Democrats are going to do everything in our power to keep President Trump and the Republican Congress from reneging on that commitment.
Meanwhile, the president asked Congress to dream big and dare bold moves for the nation.
This is our vision. This is our mission. But we can only get there together. We are one people with one destiny. We all bleed the same blood. We all salute the same great American flag. And we all are made by the same God.
Jennifer Wishon, CBN News, Washington.
I'm Abigail Robertson on Capitol Hill, where House members have a lot to say about President Trump's joint address.
I thought you saw a bold, positive message, a message that I think resonates with the American people.
Many spoke highly of the president's unifying speech and statesman-like demeanor.
I give him an A+. I think he knocked it out of the park. He went straight to the hearts of the American people. I believe he won the hearts of the American people.
I thought it was one of the best speeches I've heard him give, so it was a very powerful speech.
But not all House members were buying it.
They gave him a teleprompter. He read off his teleprompter. What I'm curious to see is what does he do when he's speaking extemporaneously, because that's when the presidential character truly comes out.
Congressman Bobby Scott told CBN he wants more specifics from the president.
Well, there are a lot of good parts to it and parts of aspiration, but it's very weak on details. The budget, for example, provided more money for defense, more money for veterans, $1 trillion for infrastructure, and tax cuts for corporations and middle class, and no indication of how the numbers would actually add up.
But Republican lawmakers feel encouraged. and are ready to work on priorities like immigration reform and repealing and replacing Obamacare.
We're going to work together, the Congress with the President, and we're going to provide the American people market-driven, competitive-driven health care.
And I think we are poised for this to be the most productive Congress in decades.
Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell met with President Trump ahead of his speech and told the media they are on board with the president's bold agenda. Reporting from Capitol Hill, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
Well, our CBN News political correspondent David Brody is with us from Washington. David, the president's getting great reviews. Who wrote that speech? It was magnificent.
Well, Stephen Miller had a big hand in that. That's his policy director, obviously. Steve Bannon was there as well. Kellyanne Conway, we are told, had a lot of input as well, Pat. And you know that part at the beginning, talking about, in essence, racial reconciliation and talking about the anti-Semitic attacks all around the country? Well, we understand Hope Hicks, who's the assistant to the president. She's in her late 20s, but boy, I tell you what, she's got the ear of the president for sure, and she's been around him for a while. So all of those folks combined to make that a pretty remarkable speach.
What do you think? It looks like it's going to be very, very hard for the Democrats to rise up against this. This was such a unifying speech for America. It wasn't harsh. It wasn't filled with all kinds of unpleasant rhetoric, but it was an uplifting speech to unify us as a nation. How can the Democrats come out against that?
It is going to be very difficult, Pat. This was the Democrats' worst nightmare. Teleprompter Trump struck last night, and he did a remarkable job. And because of that, Nancy Pelosi, I mean, you saw her in the crowd. I mean, I thought someone had to take her temperature at one point. I mean, it was not a good situation for her and the Democrats. And look, the president did give the Democrats something to think about, infrastructure and a few other programs. And, of course, that's going to rankle some Republicans on the other side of it. But the reality is this. If Donald Trump had delivered this speech during the campaign, he actually would not be president of the United States because he tapped into that anger and that frustration. But now, as president of the United States, a speech like that will do him major good service on Capitol Hill. Paul Ryan will be able to work with a speech like that for sure. He slept well last night.
Well, you know, you ask yourself, how can the Democrats, I mean, they're talking about let's educate our inner city youth. Let's rebuild the inner cities. Let's rebuild the infrastructure. How can the Democrats go against that? I can't envision what program they could come up with.
Well, they're having a hard time here because look at school choice and education. I mean, they're fighting the president on that, and that helps inner city kids quite a bit. The statistics proving that in Washington, D.C., right here in the district. And so, you know, time after time, they're trying to figure out how they're going to, in essence, fight this president. And I think that's the larger problem for the Democrats. They are internally having some combustible moments and trying to figure out the direction. So they've got internal problems, and then they have a liberal activist base that's just going to fight Trump on everything, and whether or not that's going to be good for them going forward remains to be seen. But it's a dicey road to go down, Pat.
Has Nancy Pelosi lost it a little bit mentally? I mean, she had him, Putin invading, what was it, Korea, instead of Crimea? I mean, does she know what she's talking about anymore?
Well, I will say this, that there are folks on Capitol Hill that believe it's time for new leadership, and I don't think there's any question about that. Look, Steny Hoyer, don't forget, is up there as well. He's been around for a while, and so there's talk about, in essence, replacing these folks at some point. But the other problem is, here in Washington, as you know, Pat, stature matters, and power matters, and experience matters, and Pelosi and Hoyer have that and have those connections, but that's also been part of the problem why Donald Trump talks about wanting to drain the swamp.
David, what's your appraisal of the next, say, 100 days? You think he's going to get some of this stuff through Congress?
Well, first of all, on the big ticket items like Obamacare and tax reform, no. Obamacare is a bear. I mean, it really is, to repeal and replace. And you might not see something on that until, let's call it, sometime during the summer. And that might be at best. Tax reform will be later than that, Pat. Might be at the end of the year, maybe even to early next year. There are problems with both of these policies going forward, and it's coming within Republican ranks. I mean, there's concern about tax credits that the president and some folks at the White House are thinking about doing as it relates to Obamacare, because many Republicans in that Freedom Caucus, the Tea Party folks, think that's just another entitlement program. And so there's some problems there. And then, I'm sorry, that's regarding tax reform. And then, or excuse me, Obamacare. And then on tax reform, there's the border adjustment tax. So there are quite a few different things that have to be worked out. But I will say this. We understand from White House officials that as it relates to Obamacare, they believe this is going to be incremental. They believe that this is going to be a step by step. Even if it hurts him a little bit politically, they want to get something done somehow, some way.
Well, it seems like on taxes, if they just cut the rates, I mean, just cut the business tax, cut the personal tax, just cut the rates and then let the other stuff simmer down. I mean, it doesn't take a great big overhaul to get that done.
Well, White House officials are telling me that even without tax reform this year, and they hope to get it this year, but even if they don't get tax reform this year, they are going to definitely be doing a lot of deregulation. And you've talked about this for years, Pat. And they believe that actual deregulation, whether it be at the EPA and a lot of different places around Washington, will actually help economic growth. Now, the budget that they're going to submit in March, in a few weeks here, projects 2.4% economic growth. Donald Trump wants to see, he thinks it'll be 3% economic growth. That's pretty bold, but we'll see, because he believes that a lot of what they'll be able to pay for will come from that economic growth.
Last question, David. The president put through something without any congressional oversight whatsoever, and he needed that. But there was a land grab in terms of so-called wetlands, that any water that had been anywhere near some navigable water was suddenly under the control of the United States government. And it was an outrage, and I think the courts have stopped it, but can the EPA get rid of that without a lot of hassle? Does it have to go through Congress, or what do you think?
Well, you can be sure that Scott Pruitt is on top of that, and there's going to be a lot of those type of moves to look at some of those regulations that have been going on in the past. So absolutely, that's going to be par for the course at this new Environmental Protection Agency. And also, let's remember, there's been a lot of federal land grab all over under the Obama administration, out in New Mexico and Utah. I believe, I'll get the stats specifically, but I mean, the large percentage of federal land that is grabbed by the federal government in Utah alone is pretty remarkable, Pat.
Well, David, keep it up, brother. We want to hear more from you. Thank you so much for your insight.
Thanks.